Okay, so yesterday we got up to the very final paragraph of this long biurim about what my obligations are when I call a cab or I reserve a space on a minivan, and then I end up canceling the request. This is a very, very common occurrence in Israel, especially back in the time when this is being written, and the only way to cancel it back then was by the phone. So we saw that there are so many different criteria of determining when you're chayiv and when you're patur to pay the person, and also when you do have to pay for having reserved the seat and then giving it up at the last minute, how much you're going to have to pay. So good morning. So just for the conclusion, we'll look at this final paragraph. So just to conclude, we end up with the final 9 statements of halachic conclusion. Hizmin rechev l'nesia, v'hitbatel hadavar she'avuro hizmin hanesia. That if a person hires a ride, hires a cab, hires someone to pick him up, to take him on a trip, and the whole reason why he needed to take the trip no longer applies, it was a cancellation or whatever, you're considered an ones in that situation, and therefore you're permitted to cancel the reservation. Aval, bet. But let's say you still need to take the trip, but you just want to save a few bucks, and that's the reason why you want to cancel your reservation. Yesh lebal harechev tarumot, then the cab driver does have a legitimate grievance. And when we say tarumot, so there's no financial extraction that he can make in Beis Din, but he does have a right to call you a bad person for behaving unethically. And you could be that you're acting in bad faith, which would mean that you're not permitted to do it, because when a person, as we learned in the very first siman in Choshen Mishpat, when a person is accused of being a mechusar amana, acting in bad faith, then his behavior is forbidden according to halacha. Okay, Gimel, number 3. If the driver has already left his home, in other words, he's already begun his work in order to pick you up, and then you want to cancel, that's considered to be that he's already started his work. And therefore, if you want to cancel your appointment at that point, where it's not because of an ones, then you actually are mechuyev according to halacha to pay, but you only pay him as a poel batel. And that's true even if he couldn't have gotten other customers. That was one of the things that we concluded, is that even if he couldn't have gotten other customers, or we don't know if he couldn't gotten other customers, but once he started his job, then you have to pay him as a pol batel for the job. Now, of course, we had said, and we'll see this more, you can deduct all of his expenses that he would have incurred on the trip, but we'll get to that in a second. But if you through your cancellation, you're not depriving him of any money because he could always get dispatched to somewhere else, so then you don't have to pay. In other words, you haven't really cost him a financial loss. You maybe have just burdened him with the fact that he's already left to go in your direction, but he'll just call his dispatcher and say, my ride just canceled. What else do you have in this particular area of Jerusalem, right? And if there's plenty of jobs for him to do, then you don't have to pay at all. Hey, he says, when we said above in O to Bet, that when you cancel the drive before the guy has left in his car, and all he has is a grievance, that's in a situation where he really wasn't going to get any other jobs that day. He didn't give up any other jobs and set aside time in order to take you all the way to Tzfat, let's say. But if he could have used that day to do other jobs, and he set aside the whole day to take you to Tzfat and back because you had reserved him, and now he's out of work because he had to turn away other customers. So then you have to pay him like a pol batel, which is what we said is usually considered to be half of the normal wage. And Vav, lo kepol batel baos gimel and hey, hainu dafke hecha shabitel hanasiya nasa shalom achmas oines. Avalim hu machmas ones bezek kaimelon unsubsided the pol upater hamazm. The only reason that you have to pay him is if the cancellation is not because of an onus, but rather because you don't need to go anymore, or you decided you don't want to go anymore, right? Okay. But if it's because of an onus, let's say a real mishap that a person has to go to the hospital instead, or something sudden happened that prevents you, mamish prevents you from going. So then we generally say that when an onus occurs, the employee is at the disadvantage in a case of cancellation, because the employer is not to be held responsible for the cancellation of the work contract, and therefore you're going to be putter from paying him. And of course, let's say the cab driver argues that it's not an onus, and you say that it is an onus, he'll have to bring proof. And that's at least what the Imrei Yaakov had speculated. He would have to bring proof based on the principle of hamotze mechabero olav haraya. But he did equivocate on that point, because perhaps you could say that once you make a service contract, even an oral service contract with someone, he now has a lien on your property, and then perhaps it'll be the burden of proof placed on the employer instead of on the person who hires the driver.
The cab driver could bring proof there was an onus. He doesn't. Well, it was not.
It was not an onus.
How is he going to know what went on in the life?
I can give you a great example. Yeah, he's schmoozing with a fellow driver at the water cooler. Okay, and the guy tells him, "I got a big job tomorrow. I'm taking someone to Tzfat." Oh, he says, "Oh, what a coincidence! I'm taking someone to Tzfat too." Yeah, Mrs. Bernstein told me she needs a ride. Bernstein? Hey, I'm taking a Bernstein also. What's going on? Okay. And then all of a sudden, he gets a call that this woman calls him and cancels. So she says, "Oh, you won't believe it. Someone got sick." And then, "Oh, okay, really? Okay. You wouldn't happen to be going with another driver, would you? Maybe he quoted you a lower price. Okay. There you go. There's your story, okay? You got to be a little devious in your thinking in order to come up with these stories. Thank God you have a devious teacher. Okay, number Zion, right? Number Zion. Anashim shesachu rechev ve'echad mehasochrim lo higia shalom achmas ones. Let's say a consortium of people. Let's say it was our example was 10 people got together and they decided to hire a minibus to take them to Tzfat, okay? And then one of the 10 does not show up, and it was not an onus. Chayiv l'shalim lenahag scharo mishalim. He has to pay full fare to the driver, the lorak kapol batel, and not just as a pol batel, because the guy only committed to do that long drive because he had a full 10 fares. That was what made it worthwhile for him. And it could even be if other passengers beyond those 10 came, you would still have to pay them. And it could also be that even if there are spare seats, you would and the passenger could claim, well, you weren't going to be full anyway. It doesn't matter. Doesn't matter, because the fact is that I made a calculus. The driver says I'm getting 10 full fares, and anything else that I get is additional to that. So you have to pay those. You have to be part of those initial 10. Okay. Two more. Ches. Rechev shenosea b'kvius lemakom mesuyam va'adam hizmin makom b'shuv bitlo. He says, let's say there's a daily drive that's advertised from Yerushalayim to Tzfat. Okay, it's going every day without fail, and you reserve a spot. So, im nishar belav hachi makom panoi ubal harechav lo hayalo memela anashim acherim ein sarach liten lo midi. So, as long as he didn't have to turn away any customers because you reserved that spot, then you don't have to pay. But if he had to turn away other customers because you got the last seat, okay, or your seat was was a seat that he had to, because he gave it to you, he had to lose other customers, then you would have to pay. But if he has room anyway to take additional passengers and he just doesn't have, he only gets 9 that day, and he was going anyway, so then you don't have to pay. And then finally, Yeled Chiser Mehagan Shalom Achmas Ones Yesh Lihitpasher Im Haganenet. If, let's say, a consortium of parents get together and they hire a ganenet, a kindergarten teacher, okay, and they commit to pay, and at the last minute, one of the parents pulls out, which was another example of, like, let's say, hiring the minivan. So so you should negotiate with the ganenet as to how much you have to pay. It could be you don't have to pay the full amount, but you should negotiate some kind of settlement with the ganenet. And if the reason for pulling out is because of an oines or illness, so then you don't have to pay. Again, if there's an established minhag as far as what the penalty is for when you pull out of your spot in the classroom, right? In other words, this could happen every day in any school in the city. You reserve a spot in a certain grade for your child, you put down your deposit, and now you pull out a day before school starts and say, my child is not going to this school. As long as it's not, even if it's an ones, so then you're putter. But the school would reserve the right, if they did require a deposit, to keep the deposit. If you're not an oines, so then you have to negotiate how much you should pay to the school. Okay.
The way taking the deposit means the extraction is from the other way. And so take the money away from the school, the burden is greater than.
Well, right, but the only thing is that usually the school's collection of a deposit is not a significant amount of money. Maybe it's $500 or something. It's not, compared to what tuition is, it's not a lot. Okay.
Just one quick question about what onus, maybe we talked about this, what onus is defined as. So I understand if one is sick or those sorts of things, but if the deal you had in Tzfat is still available, but you got a better deal somewhere else for that day, would that be considered an onus, or is it?
I don't think so.
Because you have no reason to go to Tzfat now.
I don't have a reason to go to Tzfat, but I'm not an onus. Nothing's precluding me from going. It just happens to be that because of my business or personal life, I don't need to go anymore.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. Onus, I believe onus means I can't go. I can't go because something is precluding me. I'm needed. I'm needed in Yerushalayim for some urgent matter, and so I have to cancel my trip. Right. Although you're right, I will grant you that it is a bit gray. What rises to the level of onus.
Yeah. I'm not sure if it was here or somewhere else, where we talked about you sell your house, or something about making aliyah, and you decide to make aliyah, and that's why you want to sell the house or you don't want to sell the house or something. It seemed like that was so. In other words, if you're going to decide to make aliyah, that's why your kid's not going to the school. Does that change anything? Is that still considered?
In other words, you're asking a question because I'm doing a mitzvah. Could I justify that because I'm doing a mitzvah of aliyah, and that's why I'm not taking the spot in the classroom, I shouldn't have to pay? I don't think so. I don't think that you can justify causing someone else financial loss just because you're doing a mitzvah. I don't think so. I don't think that will work. Yeah, I think so. That doesn't make sense. Yeah, it should be that way. Okay, so I think we're ready to begin the next sieve. Obviously, what you see here, there's a lot of detail and there's a lot of changing circumstances. And depending upon the unique circumstances, sometimes that will determine in halacha when you have to pay someone who you cancel and when you don't have to pay someone. So it can become very complicated, and a person will really have to think things through to determine whether he's chayav to pay or not. And I'm sure we've all been in a situation similar to this at one time or another in our lives, where we have to cancel a service contract. I reserve a plumber to come to my house, and then all of a sudden I can't be there when the plumber's coming, and so I have to cancel the plumber or whatever service provider, and they've already put it on their calendar. So if it's an oines, then you're patur from paying. But if it's a matter that your spouse says, I want to go out for our anniversary and I want you to cancel the service provider, so then you have to think very carefully. Have I deprived this person of their parnasa by canceling on them at the last minute? And it's probably worthwhile for you to call the service provider and say to him, this is my predicament. My wife will be very disappointed if I don't take her out for her anniversary, for our anniversary. And would I be able to ask you to come back on another day? And I'm prepared to pay you if this is causing you tremendous inconvenience. In other words, you should take that in. Part of the reason for this exercise in halacha is for us to be more sensitive to our financial, either halachic or moral obligation to someone to whom we've caused either an inconvenience or a potential financial loss. Okay, so let us.
Goes the other way. In other words, oftentimes the plumber will say, maybe if the part didn't arrive, that would be a notice, but he really has another job that he's trying to finish. So he says, I can't come tomorrow, I'll come next week.
Yeah.
Does he have any responsibility for you?
That's a good question. Does the service provider have a responsibility to me? In today's world, service providers can quit at will. And even though they've made a commitment to their employer if they don't show up, generally speaking, since he hasn't started the job, all the employer has are tarumos. He has a grievance. I can have a grievance against you because I spent my whole day at home waiting for you to come. And then you call me and say you're stuck at the other job. Look, that's a problem for me. I've taken off all this time to wait for you. But, right, does the employee have a financial obligation? Not really, because he didn't ask you to, there was no consideration given whenever a service provider books an appointment, there's no consideration made to the loss of money that you're incurring by seeking out his service. When I make an appointment at the doctor's office, they tell me to come at 2:00 and it's already 3:00 and I haven't gotten in to see the doctor, I can't send a bill to the physician for the time that I took off from work, right? Because that's just the nature of certain service providers, and it's given that if you want this service, you will have to potentially wait for an indefinite period of time, depending upon the industry. Now, obviously, that's going to be different in different kinds of services. If I'm trying to think of an example of where a person provides a service, you could in a corporate setting, let's say I have a contract that I pay on an annual basis for a particular service provider. Let's say they do my HVAC, my heating and air conditioning, and I have a factory, and my workers can't work if it's a scorching day or a freezing day. They can't work, and the service, based on my contract, the service provider has to come within 24 hours to repair the issue, and they don't show up, right? It could be that based on the service contract, I might be able to sue them for loss of productivity based on the nature of the contract with the service provider. But that would be one example of where you could charge the service provider for lost productivity. But usually it doesn't work that way, at least for an individual. Yeah. Right. Well, it's whatever the contract says, you abide by the contract. Okay. 20 minutes or 30 minutes? I thought it was always 30 minutes, but maybe that's Domino's. Yeah. Okay.
Unfortunately, no kosher pizza place offering such a thing.
That's right. There was a guy in my shul who used to joke about the kosher pizza places in LA. And he used to make the announcements. So during Sfira, he would say, you can always tell what day of Sfira is by the length of the beard hair in the pizza. But anyway, it was just an ongoing joke. All right, anyway. That's right. All right. Sif Chaf Beis. Adam o behema ha'osim lebal habayis begidule karka. Okay, so you have either a human employee or an animal who are working out in the field. They are working on the agriculture, on farmland. And it doesn't matter whether they're working out in the field on unharvested crops or on already harvested crops. Bein bechinam, bein bischar. And it doesn't make a difference whether they're working for you for free, because let's say you own the animal, or whether you're compensating them by the hour or by the day. Afilu einan osin biyado beregel, ela shenosin machal al gaba. And even if they're not handling food items, the produce, with their hands or with their feet, but rather are just schlepping the items on their backs. And so really the argument could be made that it's not as tempting to them because it's already packaged. Hare elu ochlin mimasha osin, bo bishas asiyasan o bishas nesiyas hamasoi al gaba. The halacha is, and this is based on a pasuk in the Torah, that they are permitted, according to halacha, you have an obligation to allow them to eat from the produce that they are working with. Okay, but the limitation of this halacha is that it's only when they're working on agriculture. If they're working in a chocolate bar factory, then you don't have the same, or in a cracker factory, right? Or in a milk factory, whatever the production is. This halacha is specifically stated when they're working outside in a field on farming produce. The asr lamanam be'ezet sad miniya ba'olam, and you're never allowed to prevent either the human being or the animal to prevent them from access to the food items. Afilu al yadei goy, even if you were to hire, let's say, a non-Jewish foreman to prevent them from eating, you'd be in violation. Vim ein habehema ocheles mipnei shehit seme'a, sarich lahashkota. And let's say the animal refuses to eat because it's too thirsty to eat the dry grain. So you have to actually provide fluid to the animal to drink so that it has the opportunity to eat the grain. and you have to remove all impediments from the animal's ability to eat from the produce before you start using the animal to work. So you can't muzzle the animal. If the animal's wearing a muzzle, you have to remove the muzzle in order to allow that animal to work in the field. And if there is something that prevents the animal from eating, then you're not allowed to work that animal in that particular field job, farm job, because it's going to cause the animal additional suffering. V'hamoneya es habehema afilu bekol milechol mimashi osa on noses. And if anyone who prevents an animal from eating, or from what the work from the work item that it's working with. In other words, if the animal is schlepping or harvesting or plowing, and you're not allowing that animal to eat from that produce, anyone who does so, even if you just do it bekol, by making a loud noise, that deters the animal. You're not physically deterring it, but you're psychologically deterring it. Areza loke. If you do so, you get malchus. So we're showing how severe this is. Okay, afilu hi shalo, and that's true even if the animal is your property. Afilu hi shal nachri, and that's true even if the animal is the property of a non-Jew. You can't rationalize and say, well, it's not my animal, it's the Gentile's animal. No. And this is based on the halacha shenemar lo sachsom shor b'disho. Torah says explicitly that you're not allowed to muzzle an animal in the course of its harvest. Echad shor ve'echad kol behema v'chaya. And this is true not only for an ox that is pulling the plow or is pulling the wagon, but it's true of any animal, both domesticated and non-domesticated. Afilu tameya, even if it's not a kosher animal, it could be a horse or a donkey. Echad dayish ve'echad kol melacha shebetalush. It doesn't matter whether it's at the time of harvest or the time of plowing or any other procedural work that's done over the course of the agricultural cycle. Okay, and it doesn't matter whether the produce is already harvested or whether it's in the process of being harvested or whether it's still attached to the ground. And if it's true for an animal that this is going to cause pain and suffering to an animal, then certainly you can't do that to a human being. So you have people working in your orchard who are picking fruit. You have an obligation to allow them to eat the produce at will. You can't muzzle them and you can't stop them from taking. And I'm sure that was one of the, probably one of many types of cruelty that was done in times of slavery, even in the 19th century. Okay, so, and therefore, the kal v'chomer la'adam ha'osa b'talush, u'vamechubar, u'omer, ki savo b'kerem re'echa v'achalta anavim kenafshecha savecha, ve'el kel yichal lo sitein. So the Torah just says that when it comes to human beings who are working out in the field, it says that when you come into your friend's vineyard, then the halacha is you're allowed to eat to your heart's delight the grapes that you encounter in his vineyard. The only thing that you're not permitted to do is to store them in a container and take that with you. It's like going to Kiddush. You can eat as much as you want. When you come to Kiddush, just don't put anything in a bag. No doggy bags at the Kiddush, which unfortunately does take place. Okay.
Rabbi,
Yes.
It says in the pasuk there, Re'echa, and you said in the past, Re'echa usually means your fellow Jewish person.
That's
so
right.
if you're in a non-Jewish field, is it the same? Would the same apply?
We'll see.
Okay, good.
We're going to see.
Right.
But
Thank
you're
you.
right. Normally, Re'echa usually means your fellow Jew. But we'll have to see if it how the Rav Shulchan Aruch learns the pasuk. It's a good question. Uvapoel ha'obed b'kerem. So hakasuv medaber. So this, our sages understand that this is referring to a worker when it says when you come into your fellow's vineyard, then you have to when you go into your fellow's vineyard is referring to if you're the worker, then you have a right to eat his grapes to your heart's delight. Okay, so we're going to hold it here. We'll continue this halacha in Yirtzeh Hashem tomorrow. Okay, have a great day, everybody.